You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the Okayest Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Dropping Pins podcast, one of the podcasts of the Okayest Hunter Network. I'm really excited for the conversation that we've already started and we're about to have tonight on the Dropping Pins podcast. We've got an amazing guest with a wealth of knowledge for all things outdoors and just handling the outdoors and family life in general. Tonight, we are lucky enough to have on Tony Peterson, who needs no introduction, but if you have not heard of Tony before, he has written hundreds of articles for all of the big name magazines over the years. He is on the Meat Eater staff and films and podcasts and does everything that you would want to do in the outdoor industry, and a lot of things I'm sure he doesn't want to do. But Tony, you're someone I have looked up to for a long time and have loved reading your stories and all of your adventures across America. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really great to have you on.
Yeah, I appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and you were just sharing before the show that you were lucky enough to take your daughter out for some bear hunting this past weekend. It sounds like you guys had some good success.
I'll tell you what, buddy. I've had two hunts with that daughter. So I have twin 12-year-olds. And this daughter last year, we did an all-day sit in northern Wisconsin when she was 11. Because we could not get on a deer. I mean, I was struggling hard, and I'm literally trying to put her on any deer. So I told her, I said, we're going to go over. It was the first weekend in November. I'm like, we're going to put out that Dave Smith doe decoy, and we are going to sit all day, and some little buck's going to pop out of the swamp and see it eventually, and he's going to come in. And she went over there and we sat all day and never saw a deer until 20 minutes before quitting time. And we heard a stick snap in the swamp. And this little buck came out and put on a show and worked a scrape and came right in. And she smoked him. And it was like, it was just so cool on so many levels, you know? And then the same daughter drew that bear tag this year. And I am a bad bear hunter. Like I do not get bears. I can bait just fine. I can't get them in very well. I don't understand them. I'm like such a novice when it comes to it, but I really wanted to give her a good chance. And so we spent quite a bit of time setting things up and putting bait out and whatever. And I had a bear daylighting for 9 days in a row, which is like,
that's incredible.
Unreal. Never happens to me. You know, I had two bears coming into this. One was like a little, or, you know, like a medium sized, you know, like your 150, 170 type, you know, bear, like, like the real average bear that people shoot, not the 300 pounders. And the other one's belly was on the ground and it's a legit 400 pounder that never came in daylight. So I'm like, we have one bear to hunt. And the first day we hunted it was the first day that bear didn't show up in 9 days. And so the next day I told her, I said, honey, we only have 2 days. We're going to go do an all-day sit. We're going to be super quiet. We're going to close up that blind just for the wind, for everything, because the way I had to set it up, the shot was 15 yards. So it was tight.
You were tight, yeah.
And we were sitting there, and she's a gamer, man. She's like, we're going to go do this. And at about 11:30, I could see she was super tired. And it was kind of getting warm in the blind, you know. And I'm like, honey, I'll lay down some sweatshirts and you can build a little nest and I'll keep watch. And just like, if you need to sleep, because we have 9 hours left essentially, you know,
it's a long day.
She usually doesn't sleep. Her sister will sleep the whole time. Like I have to wake her up for everything. But anyway, she lays down and I'm telling you, I just kind of heard her breathing get into that like deep sleep cadence. And I looked up and there's a bear walking in 20 yards away. And I'm like, oh, holy shit. Like we got work to do. So I wake her up and I'm like, honey, you got to be quiet. And I got to set her chair up because I'd moved it on the side. And she gets up and I set the chair up and this bear comes in, pokes its nose up, sniffs and turns around and walks away. And I go, there goes our bear. Like I was like devastated and it stopped, turned around again and left. And
Did she get to see it? did she get to see it that
Oh
time?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
she was
I mean, it
already
was
popped
15
up.
yards away. It was just, there was a little bit of brush before it gets to the bait pile. So it stuck its head out. And I didn't know what to do. I'm like, I don't know how to solve for this because our only bear just winded us. So I was like, should I get out and go bang around on the logs like I just came into bait? Like try to make it seem like I just showed up. Like, and then I'm sitting there, I'm like, am I overthinking this? Like, I don't, I literally didn't know. And I was kind of panicked because the day before I was like, we're going to kill that bear. Doesn't show. So as I'm like, kind of like whispering to her, like, I don't, like maybe I should try this. Maybe I should try that. Maybe we should just wait. We both look out and here comes that bear back in. And it walks in and it sticks its nose up for like a minute and a half. And then it walks up and sits. You have to put logs on the bait site over there. Sits right on top of the logs like a dog. And I whispered to her, I said, honey, the first shot you get, take it. And she shot. And I was like, oh, I didn't mean that one. Like, but to her credit, that bear was sitting there broadside. It was just sitting down. So it was like not how you think of the angle. And she's I couldn't tell at the time because I was running my phone. I had 4 cameras going. Only one of them actually worked. But
sounds about par for the course,
dude.
For
everything. I continually amaze myself at how bad I am at stuff. So she shoots and you can't see. It's a crossbow, right? Like I can't see the bolts. They're so fast. And I was filming anyway, so I was messing around. I didn't know she was going to shoot. So as I like go to look back on my phone to see if I got it, to see where the hit was, we heard the death moan. And I was like, and she was like, Dad, I think I was on it. And she's a good shot. Like she's kind of just a natural. And so I'm like, oh my God, we looked at the footage and it was like perfect right behind the crease halfway up. And it was like, that was the other one, that all day sit for the deer last year on the decoy. And this bear was just like, it's just a different level, man. Like I was so excited that I was trying to like text my buddies because I had one of my buddies was hunting with his son up there as well.
Okay.
I couldn't get a text out for like 15 minutes. I was shaking so bad, just like pure excitement. And I was like, no, I talked to my wife about this when we got back. I'm like, there's not hardly anything in life that offers you that. You know what I mean? Like we talk about this in a lot of different ways, but when something like that happens, there's nothing like, I mean, I don't know, maybe like skydiving or that squirrel suit shit or whatever, like people do, like maybe, but mostly like to the average person, that feeling is out of reach. Like they don't do anything. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying like, we have like a secret to something special.
Yeah. And that's that. I mean, I've skydived before and I used to be the adrenaline junkie when I was a younger guy and wasn't worried about getting hurt and not being able to work and pay bills for the family. And like you get the adrenaline rush, but the hunting connection is just, it is something that's like intrinsic in you. That's like in your human DNA, it's really hard to describe that, but it is absolutely different than just an adrenaline dump. Like,
right.
It's just different. And to describe that to someone who's not experienced is one of the hardest things there is to do because it seems like a weird thing to enjoy and like have an adrenaline dump for someone who doesn't do it. But I mean, that's really like the connection that you want people to be able to experience because that's just awesome. And I mean, I'm not surprised at all because just from reading your adventures, but it sounds like your daughter is coming up doing it. Like, she's earned all of her stripes. She sat the all day sits. Like that's something that me and my buddies talk about with our kids who are getting like hunting age. Like, how easy do you want to make it? And I was like, I want my kids to know what it's like. Like my son comes with me and he goes through some shit and like, that's just normal to him now, like it's just normal. And I was like, if you make it too easy, when they find out what it's really like, they're going to be like, I don't want to do that.
Right. That's a big struggle, man. Cause you can really set it up. And, I did, for them when they started turkeys and deer, I mean, I handed it to them on a silver platter, like it was just real good setups anyway. And I've like gradually rolled them into the grunt work part.
Yeah.
Like I made them come over because my other daughter drew a bear tag last year and we had a terrible hunt, but I made them come over and I'm like, you're going to help me bait. We're going to go into the swamp and we're going to swat deer flies and we're going to do this process and set up our deer blinds. And just like, I feel like they're at a point now where they have to earn it a little bit,
That's awesome.
And I think, when you talk about like the adrenaline rush of skydiving, like I've never done that, but there's a difference in like the build up to what we do. And you might, it's not like, with skydiving, it's like, you're going to book that and you're going to go, right? Like, I mean, maybe a weather or something would keep you away, but like generally you're like, on Tuesday at 2:00, we're jumping on that plane.
Yep.
When you're like, I'm hunting big bucks, or I'm hunting this bear or whatever, you might be committing yourself to 5 years. Like, you don't know. You might kill it the first day, or you might go 10 years of not being able to kill a Pope and young buck.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about that, like when you think about the build up to that, you have like there's not many things in life where you're going to be that invested for that long. It's just a different deal.
100%, man. 100%. And I guess we'll use that as a little bit of the segue, because that's kind of what we're trying to talk about. That's so cool. Congrats to your daughter and to you for having that experience and building that up in them. And then to kind of transition into what we're going to, the dropping pin series, what we're trying to do here is just educate people who are either high level, medium, it doesn't matter, but like with stories and sharing our experiences and our situations is where people can make connections in their own hunting and their styles, and hopefully take that what can be 5 or more years of trying and effort and try to help people make those connections a little quicker. That's why I was so excited to talk to you on here, just because you've had some awesome different experiences all across the country, hunting public lands, hunting all over. And I think hearing some of your experiences are going to help all of us. So, Tony, I'd love to just kind of, I know this is a tough one, but we usually ask our guests, just kind of what terrain you kind of grew up hunting. And for a lot of the guys, they're still hunting the stuff they grew up in. I know for you've kind of traveled across. So I'll let you kind of talk about a little bit of your experience and that kind of stuff. And then what is kind of your favorite stuff maybe to hunt, or what kind of stuff you find the most rewarding?
Right, man. So I grew up in southeastern Minnesota, pretty close to the Mississippi River. So I grew up in the driftless region down there, big bluffs, real good soil, lots of ag. Essentially, if you were hunting cover, it was on a hill, because everything that was flat was under the plow, right?
Farmed, yep.
Right. And I just love, you just kind of have roots where you have roots, right? Like I grew up there, and there's something when I get somewhere Midwest that has some hills and some fields, I just feel like I'm kind of right in my element again. Like I drew an Iowa tag this year, and I'm going to go down and hunt some public land down there. And I hunted there in 2020, and it's got the same feel. You're on a river bottom, it smells the same. The deer movement's kind of works the same, the funnels and pinch points and the bedding and all that stuff. But that's where I grew up. But I'm telling you, man, I've been pretty lucky to hunt all over. And if you were like, hey, pick your favorite environment to hunt in, I don't know if I could. I mean, I'm really hooked on the big woods thing in northern Wisconsin and a couple other places. And I've started to get into like kind of the prairie pothole stuff, the cattails, where there's no trees, and you have to solve for the reality that they live in 6-foot tall cattails, and you can't see them till they come out, and you have limited setups. And it's just, I think one of the things that I love about whitetails the most is just that reality that even in your own state, you can hunt vastly different types of terrain.
Absolutely.
And really put yourself like in new situations. And I think whitetails, man, like that's kind of an underrated aspect of it. We all just, we paint this picture of like dreaming about that Iowa food plot or whatever, but I'm like, whitetails, a lot of Western hunters look at them like, like they're, they don't count compared to the animals they hunt. Like there's no variety. It's all the same. And I'm like, when you dig into it, whitetails can take you so many different places in so many environments.
I love that piece that you just added there, because I was just talking with another buddy about this the other day, but like we all know that the whitetail is the king of versatility and living in all these different little places, suburban, desert, like they're so good at living in all these places. But we don't always talk about what you just mentioned, which is the opportunity it affords us to be versatile and to learn how to hunt all those different areas. This one animal spread across the country in all these different environments. You can do whatever style you want to learn. You can hunt whitetail for it. Like the spot and stock, the open stuff, the big woods, like it allows you to learn in so many different ways, not just them living there, but like you could do whatever the hell you want here in Wisconsin. Big woods down to the southeastern part where I live now, that's marshes, like it even just this one state, you can learn so many different ways to attack, the whitetail woods, if you will. And I think that's just one of my favorite parts is trying to learn all the new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we don't we have gotten really focused on this message of like get the best spot you can, lock it up, and then make this little deer oasis, which is great if people want to do it, whatever. But the reality of just being able to stay within your state and go hunt vastly different terrain than you're used to and habitat, and have opportunities where you're gonna get tags, like it's just easier to come by those opportunities, and they can take you. I mean, I've hunted whitetails in a lot of different places, and I mean, I've hunted them down in Florida where they're rutting in the middle of the summer, and you're dealing with an unreal amount of bugs, and there's alligators, and it's like they're the same deer. I mean, it's like you took this incredible animal and you just put it in every freaking environment out there, and it goes, well, I guess I live here now, and you can hunt them. And I just think that's so cool.
Heck yeah. I mean, the Florida whitetail, that seems like one of the more difficult areas to hunt them. If you ask me, I've not done it, but it seems just like you talk to anybody who hunts down there and they're like, I don't even want to do it. I'm addicted, but I don't even want to do it. It's so hard.
Well, that is an unforgiving environment, man. Like, it's just the bugs and the snakes and the fact that there's not 2 feet elevation change in the entire state. I mean, I'm like, when people are like, hey, what's it like to hunt in Florida? I'm like, when you go to Florida, you should go fishing. Like, that's best. Right. Yeah. Maybe go get your Osceola or whatever if you need to do that to get your turkey slam. But if I go to Florida, I'm like, I want to be on a beach. I want to be fishing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So yeah, I guess I'll transition there, Tony, in your travels and your experiences. Obviously, the Dropping Pins podcast, we're trying to do some story-based learning for our listeners. What stories maybe stand out in your mind, or were things that just kind of teed you off earlier in your career, or later, whenever, that just kind of got you to think about how you're going into these out-of-state hunts, or even your home area, but like just got you thinking or got the ball rolling, had those little aha moments that really made things start clicking for you and made you, maybe even a little bit more addicted to what you do? Well, what could you share with us?
Oh man. I mean, I'm
sure you've only got 500 different stories to think of right now, but do your best.
The teachable moments, the moments in the outdoors that have made me go like, whoa, like where I felt like I changed, or where I felt like there's me before this and there's me after. I mean, I've had a lot of them, and they almost always are tied to like how they force me to recalibrate my brain and just go, what you believed before this happened is total bullshit, and you need to think about this differently because you were just shown that that's not true. And so it took me, like a lot of us, or a lot of people in my age group, I started when I was 12 years old bow hunting. That was when you could start in Minnesota. That was just it. I hunted so hard until I was 26. I never killed a buck bigger than 2.5 years old. And I mean, I'm talking, I was like an OG mobile hunter by accident when I was 14, because I had one tree stand and I had no patience to ride out a dead spot. And so, I mean, I hunted so much and I could not kill a 3.5-year-old plus buck. Like a Pope and Young minimum buck was like a unicorn. I got to the point like in my early 20s where I would probably get an opportunity a year. Like if I really got after it, I would have that one big buck, and I'm talking like a 125 to 140 type deer, and I would screw it up. Like I'd miss it over and over, buck fever, the whole thing. And I just got to the point where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to happen. Like I feel like I'd go out and I'd rattle, I'd go out and I'd grunt, I'd go out and try things that I'd heard about and they wouldn't work. But I would get around deer by just trying to like get to new spots, read some sign, and just like, okay, set up here, see what happens. And, if you see something happen over there, just tomorrow go there. And so I kind of started to just like fall into the style that has worked for me for a long time, but I believed that it wasn't going to happen. And so when I was 26, I got married. moved to the Twin Cities from southeastern Minnesota. Nightmare. I was miserable, depressed, hated every second of it. No joke.
I can imagine.
Really had a hard time adjusting, other than the fact that I found some lakes with some big fish in that helped me along, but it was rough stuff. And the opener, to that point, I had never missed an opening day. Like, it was like, you got to be out there. One of my wife's friends got married on the opening day. I had to work. I was working at I was selling wine. Like, I was in a place where I was like, this sucks on every level. So not only was there a wedding I absolutely didn't want to go to on opening day, there was a Tool concert in the cities that a bunch of my buddies went to. So I'm at this wedding, not hunting, and my buddies are calling me like from the Tool concert. And I'm like, God, this sucks. Anyway.
What am I doing?
Right. A lot of bad decisions on my part. So I was like, I'm going to go down to southeastern Minnesota the second weekend of the season. And I'm like, this is not going to be a good year for me. Like, my headspace is not, I was in a bad place. I'm like, I'm not going to have that much time to hunt. I was trying to find places to hunt around the cities. I couldn't find a deer on public land. I was struggling. And so I was, even before I walked out there with a bow one time, I was like, this is going to be a bad year. Like, this is going to be a clunker. So anyway, the next weekend, I had to work in the morning. And I was 2 hours from home, and I had a brand new golden retriever puppy. And I'm like trying to think in my head, okay, like, I got to get that dog. I got to bring her with me because I was going to stay at my buddy's house. His girlfriend's going to be there. I'm going to hand her this dog. I'm going to drive out to the farm, and I'm going to have to run to my stand because my timing was like rough. So it's, it's one of those drives where you're like, every little bit of traffic or every person that cuts you off, you're like, you're keeping me from the stand. Yeah,
Just
right.
Makes you go crazy.
White knuckle. So I drive down there, grab my pup, knock on the door. Amy answers the door, hand the pup off to her. I'm like, I got to go. I'll see you in 3 hours. Drive out to the woods. And I was going to go sit a different stand than the one I sat on. But as I'm driving there, there's like a little bit of mist coming down. It's overcast. It's just raining a little bit. And I'm like, man, I gotta stand on this little strip of beans that should just kind of be a no-brainer in the rain and in the early season on green beans, right? Just dumb, like not a lot of high level thinking there. Just like, deer like beans and they really like it when it rains in the early season. So I get there, get my bow, and I run out there, and I got into my stand and set up. And I remember just sitting there like, I just don't have confidence. Like, I'm just, you know what I mean? I'm like, I feel like I'm just kind of hunting to hunt, and I didn't have a good plan going. And I looked up, and there's this great big buck walking right down the middle of the strip. And the strip's only like 40 yards wide. And I'm like, oh my God, like, first deer, way bigger than anything I've ever even shot at. And, he walks in, and I've had buck fever my whole life. And so in my head, I'm like, do not screw this up. Like, don't for once, just do it right. Like, please just do it right. And this buck walks in, turns toward me, and poses up at like 8 yards. And I shoot, and I thought he was just a mainframe 8-pointer, but like a nice one. I was like, I think that's a Pope and Young buck, And so he runs off, stops, and I'm like, oh my God, they never stop. Like, this is bad. Runs off again. And I thought I heard him crash. And I was like, I'm pretty bad at this, but what are the odds I screwed up an 8-yard shot at a buck with vitals that are like the size of a pizza pan, right? And so I'm sitting there, and like, I'm not patient. I'm like, like, I got to get down and find that arrow. And I go down there, it's just covered in blood, and there's like blood painted through the beans. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I go after, and I start to blood trail him. And he's, like 125, 150 yards away, piled up, and he's got 14 points, non-typical stuff all over. And I just remember, like I just couldn't believe it. Like, it was so surreal that out of all of the things I had tried in 14 years and all of the effort I had put in and all of like the struggle and just like the misses and the, like everything that comes into it, all the failure, that it was that easy. And I just remember, like, it felt like I had gone from being one thing to suddenly becoming another thing. And I was like, this is possible. It didn't, like, academically, you're like, this is possible, right? Any
Yep.
idiot could walk out there and shoot a deer. But when you go that hard for so long and it doesn't happen, and it's because you screw up over and over and over again, you know, like you start to think like, maybe this is just not, maybe I'm meant to be a golfer,
me.
you know, like
It's me.
dude, everybody, I shouldn't
Yeah.
say that, almost everybody goes through that stage,
Yeah.
especially if you're bow hunting, right? Like it's just so easy to screw that up, the shots, and
And
just
I
not be
think,
a closer.
sorry. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And another thing that I'm seeing in the last couple of years with this giant wealth of knowledge that is just, thrown up in everybody's faces, the podcast, all of these great learning things, the people who are starting now, we get a lot of more adult onset hunters, friends of friends or whatever. And like, I've done a whole season. I've done everything that they've said. And like, I didn't kill one. And it's like what you said, but you went through this, like, most of us, like a 10-year period where you've tried it, and you start to believe that either it's you that's messing up, like, what am I doing? Or like these tactics are BS, or like, but until you find that stride and truly believe that what you do can do it, like that moment you had, it does seem like an unattainable feat. Like,
Right.
and the longer it goes on, the harder it is for guys to get over that mental hurdle of like trusting yourself and being able to like make a judgment call without second guessing the shit out of everything you do. And that's really hard for new hunters.
Well, it is. And it's, I mean, the thing, this has held us back probably since we were throwing spears at woolly mammoths, right? Is like, we can't help but chase we can't help but lean into the trophy thing, right? But you can't get good at shooting deer without shooting deer. Like, you can't get good at your timing your draw, and all of the sudden moving your point of impact 4 inches because that deer scratches its nose or just does like one little move or something. And so often, people start out at this stuff and they hear, like, oh, I went out and killed a couple does, or like, it's, like, we filled the freezer last, like, they hear like a lot of minimizing this thing that can be really hard. Like, I'm not talking killing big bucks. I'm talking about literally making a good shot on any deer with archery tackle. And so it's easy to sort of look past that developmental part of it, but you can't replace it. Like, you can't jump the line. It just doesn't work very well. And I look at that stuff when you talk about like, putting in a whole season and feeling like you're doing everything right and you have the right gear and you're following the right people and you're like, man, I feel like I've earned it and it hasn't delivered. I think that one of the things that's really tough about what I do and what I see in the hunting space, particularly with whitetails, maybe that's just because I know it best, but is like, Andy May can sit here and tell you exactly how he killed a buck. There's so much that he can't tell you about how he killed that buck. That
About all of his decision-making process that's now his subconscious. Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. I don't. So I took a guy out fishing 2 weeks ago, and I fish a lot, right? Like, I like bass fishing, whatever. He's more of kind of a walleye guy, not used to casting. And we had smallies really schooled up. It was really good fishing. And, they're on some sand drops and stuff. So it's kind of like, if you make the right cast here, we'll catch 4 or 5 of them before we put the school down and you'll move on. It was good. And he's throwing the same thing I'm throwing, and I'd line him up and I'd be like, dude, you got to aim for like that point of pencil reeds. And he'd reel through and not catch one 5 times. And I would throw in there and catch one. And I can't really explain to you what's different. There's just something different. And it's just from the reps, like, he's brand new to it. He's not gonna slow it down or just put a little bit of different movement on that swim bait or whatever you're doing. There's like unconscious decisions we make all the time that you can't like absorb that. You're not going to get that through YouTube. It's just like, you gotta get out there and do it.
I think one of the things you just said when we were talking about the does, and you said diminishing, like when you just say, yeah, I shot a doe, like I have done that. Like, I feel hypocritical looking back on it now, but I think that's something that maybe it will be a goal for my season here, is especially like talking about it. Like last season, I shot 2 does, and like when we talked about it with Eric and Greg on the podcast, I was like, oh, it was a good weekend. You know, I shot a doe. And like I highlighted that the kids came out and blood trailed with me, which was great. But my first piece of advice to new hunters is like, get as many legal deer under your belt as you can. Like, so if I'm giving that advice, I really shouldn't be diminishing the importance of harvesting a doe, which is what I feel like I've been doing. I just feel like no one really wants to hear about it. So I'm not going to talk about it, you know, but man, I should go through the motions and talk about the shot. And when I decided, like, I feel like that's an opportunity for those people to not only hear the advice of go shoot them, but like to learn something about those moments. And like, I feel like I should do a better job this season of making that a priority.
Let me tell you a story about does, because I think that's a good goal. And I think this is just human nature, but you know, a lot of people, you kind of have your spot, right? Like it's grandma's farm or whatever, like our lease or whatever. And you get really good at hunting that. And you can get really good at hunting does on a place like that, right? Like you just kind of have it dialed. Mm-hmm. And so there's not a challenge there, right? But that doesn't apply. Like once you're beyond the boundaries of that property, those rules might not apply anymore. And so I'll just give you an example. I own 2 little properties in northern Wisconsin. I almost never hunt them. I have one, you know, where my daughter killed that bear. I have a kill plot that I work on that they hunt. And it's like, it's really good for spikes and forkies and about 1 to 2 does a year. And I've killed a couple in there, you know, just, I used, like you said, like I used to take my daughters in there sitting with me, but it was like, they're probably going to come in. You're going to have a 15 to 20 yard shot from the ground, you know, whatever. Like for me, it wasn't very challenging, but that was the setup. I can drive 10 minutes from there and hunt like true big woods, public land. And I've done this on years. I did this in like 2018, 2019. I don't remember what year it was, where I gave myself like 6-7 days during the rut. I had a doe tag and I had a buck tag. I'm like, I'm going to go run and gun public land. I'm going to hunt a decent buck and I'm going to fill this doe tag. And I'll tell you what, filling that doe tag made me realize that those kill plot deer are not the same thing. I mean, I got picked off. I got on a bunch of deer. I got picked off over and over. And you know how those deer are. Like some places, you know, like I hunt out west or whatever, even on public land, they look at you and it just doesn't register. Those northern Wisconsin deer, it registers real fast.
They don't put up with anything.
Right. No curiosity. They're just gone.
No.
And I ended up hunting. I never killed a buck. I saw some little ones, never had one close enough. Had some does I started to draw on, busted me. I finally got on a situation where there was a private property that had a horse hayfield on it. And there was a ton, like thousands of acres of national forest around it. So the deer were leaving the national forest to go feed there at some point, but you were hunting them in the woods. You just kind of knew the direction they were going to go to and where they were going to come back from. So like you had an edge there, you know, and there were multiple trails. And I finally went in after like 5 days of not being able to kill a doe, went in and it was like kind of crunchy. It was cold. There was snow. And I set up on this trail and every deer that I had tried to draw on had busted me to that point up there. I mean, I was getting worked by them. And I heard a deer coming up the hill and I drew way before, because I'm like, I got a buck and a doe tag. So if this is not like a fawn, it's in trouble, right? And this big mature doe walks up like 18, 19 yards away and immediately looks at me, and I shot her and she ran off, 70, 80 yards and tipped over. And I just remember thinking like, that was like 1,000 times harder than it should be. But we don't talk about that, right? Like when you look at the hunting industry, the most of the information that comes out, it is coming from really good hunters most of the time. It really is. But also it's coming from people a lot of times who there would be zero challenge to go out for them to kill does any day of the season. And so when people who don't have that are exposed to that over and over again, like it's easy to internalize that and be like, well, does are easy, little bucks are easy, big bucks are hard. But go hunt public land in Oklahoma sometime and tell me which deer are easy and which ones are hard. Like get out of your tree stand or your box blind and go still hunt one and tell me which deer suddenly become challenging. Like it's just, the rules are just all over the place on this stuff.
I don't I don't want to get into a huge public versus private kind of thing. That's not the idea here. But earlier, I think you had mentioned Bill Winke's name, and then maybe this was before we even kicked off. And man, Bill Winke's a guy I've always admired. I've loved watching all of his stuff. I read, the articles he used to put out, and watching his stuff with Midwest Whitetail. I love to watch it because I like seeing big deer.
Right.
But like how he's hunting his farms, I always was just like, that's the exact opposite of what I would do as like a public land guy. I was like, it's so cool that he can hunt conservatively and just touch the fringes. But I was like, I could never do that in my situation. I respect it. But when you watch the shows and you see the bucks and you see how conservative he is, it's like, man, if I was coming up and hunting and didn't know what I know now, I would think I should just tiptoe around the edges and like, you never see a damn thing on the public grounds.
Right. I mean, well, Bill's great. I love Bill, but I mean, he spent a lot of time on 1,000 acres in Southern Iowa that he owned or co-owned. And that is just not the same as most people, right? Like, and that what you're talking about there, that's one thing that drives me crazy because the messaging has been, and this has gotten really bad with the onslaught of cell cameras where don't go in until everything's right. Just, you don't have to push it. Don't be cavalier, be very conservative. Don't go in and push it because you'll screw everything up. And it's like, yeah, I guess if you have 1,000 acres and 50 cameras spread out on, 100 acres of food plots, that's like a very good way to do it. Like it just is. But if you're hunting public land, and I really think, this is purely anecdotal, but from what I've seen the last few years, I really think a lot of people even hunting public land are following that kind of idea of like, I got to wait till they're daylighting, then I'm going to go. I feel like it's actually making it better for me. Cause I'm not doing that, but I'm like, you're not doing that either. You know what I mean? Like you think you're doing that, but you're just not hunting and somebody else is going through there, and you're doing that like to the detriment of, like your potential with the weather, with the seasonal timing, with the reality of when people will be there and when they won't, and so it's like, you can take a lot of lessons out of people who are hunting really good spots. Trust me, like Bill Winke can teach you a lot about whitetail hunting, 100%. A lot of that stuff transcends, but some of it doesn't. And that's an important thing to acknowledge, especially for newer hunters, to be like, I'm not saying like don't be pissy or whatever about it. Like just recognize what you're working with. So if you're hunting public land, you don't want to wait. Like, trust me, you want to go now, and you want to go Tuesday morning instead of Saturday if you can. And you want to hunt the lull if you can, because most of your competition won't. And if it's 85 degrees, you want to go hunting because most of your competition won't. And you think like the people who are telling you that stuff mostly are working just the deer. All they have to do is figure out the deer. What most of the people who are listening to a podcast like this have to do is work the people, because that's 100%. What the deer are doing. And it's just a hard thing to do. And it's a hard message to get across.
Well, yeah. And you're trying to learn, or you're trying to predict another variable that you have little or no control over. Like you just assume that there's going to be pressure, but that's one of those things that like you can learn all you want about the deer behavior, about what they do and what type of terrain, but that element is so unpredictable. So like those people who are contemplating, do I go hunt opening weekend? It's hot. It's going to be mosquitoes. Yeah, you do. Because if you don't, someone else is going to be in there. And if you think you got a shot at making something happen, right, you got to take that shot. And then you go out and you scout and find the next spot where you can take a shot. And like, then just continue.
Man, it's so true. And I mean, the one thing, like we try to make deer really predictable. I mean, that's kind of like the method for like, make a really good spot, leave it alone, and the deer become very patternable, very predictable. If you don't have that situation, what like the most next predictable thing is your behavior and other hunters' behavior. And believe me, like I go to public land in so many different states, and I've hunted like a lot of different type of stuff. I don't know if I've ever hunted anywhere where people haven't told me that there's no big bucks or you can't do it or right on down the line, right? Like it's not worth going there. And when you see like how most people hunt, they're going in to the first field edge on public land to set up, and it's like it's just not going to work. Like it's just not. They know you're there. You're the 17th person to do that. I know it. I know it looks like how it should go. Like I always equate it to. I love fishing the Mississippi River, right? In the backwaters of the Mississippi, on quite a few of the pools, starting up here in Minnesota and heading way down, maybe to Savannah, Illinois, or maybe farther. I don't know. The backwaters all look like they should be teeming with largemouth bass. You're like, every one of them has lily pads and the right, like the look is there, but there's no, like, that doesn't mean anything, like they are where they are. So if there's a little bit of current coming off the main channel through this one patch, or there's a little bit deeper water or an old, stump field where they cleared it, way back in the day, there has to be something more. So you can't, like as a whitetail hunter or as a fisherman, you can't just look at it and go, well, this is it, because they're going to show you. And so, yeah, you go through it. And I think that with whitetails, where it's like, you can watch the Sportsman's Channel all day long and see deer get shot in the middle of fields and food plots, and that's great. But if you're walking out on public land in Kentucky or something, like that's probably not your jam. And the deer will show you where they are, just as the people will show you where they are. And it's like it's a hard thing to get over, man. It's like a hard lesson to learn, but once you get it, it'll treat you well.
You just want so badly for it to be like, for it to be true, and for it to have that one, oh, maybe this is going to be that easy spot. And, maybe this is it.
Dude,
very rarely, it very rarely is.
Sometimes it is. Right? Like sometimes you just get an easy one in a place where you're like, this is where I wanted to hunt, and they came in and I shot them. Like sometimes, but most of the time it's really you fighting against where you want to hunt versus where they're showing you they're living. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I killed a buck in 2017, I think it was, on public land in South Dakota. And we went out there, and I do this all the time. This is how stupid I am. I looked at the forecast and it was hot, right? It was like 80s in the day. And I'm like, perfect. I'm going to go sit some ponds and I'm just going to shoot one. It's going to be easy. I've done that in so many states and showed up, and all of a sudden a cold front comes in, or in that case, the night before the season. And I walked about 712 miles scouting ponds the day before. It sweated my ass off. And I'm like, I got a whole pond plan laid out. And that night it rained so hard that I had to like wake up and push the top of my tent so it didn't collapse on me.
Oh,
And
no.
dude, I went out. So obviously you're calling an audible right out of the gate. So I went to a different spot, climbed into my stand. I'm like, I'm going to sit all day. Cause I'm like, even though it was in September, it was public land. And I'm like, I'm just going to, I'm going to go back to a wet tent. Who cares? Right. I was soaked to the bone before first light. And I was like, well, there's no way I'm going to sit all day. I'm like, I got to figure out something. And so I was driving back to camp. I had a blind in camp that I hadn't put out yet. And so I'm like, I'm going to maybe put this out somewhere. I don't know, like just as an option, because now this rain's going to stick. Right. And so as I'm driving back, my tag was good for a mule deer or a whitetail. And I'm driving past this property that's public. And there's a nice mule deer standing right off the road. And I'm like, holy shit. So I drive past. I'm like, I'm going to go stalk that deer just because it's like noon and whatever. Right. So
What else do you have to do?
Right. I crawl up there and get to where he, I'm like, okay, I'm going to drop through this little drainage and he's going to be right on the other side somewhere visible. And so I get up there and there's 3 mule deer bucks 50 yards away, and they're like fighting in a circle, kind of just sparring. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to kill a big mule deer, like right out of the gate, right off the road, like, 100 yards off the road. This is going to be so awesome. And I crawl up to the wood edge, range them, and I feel the wind hit my back and they all take off. And, like whatever happens, stalking mule deer, that happens all the time. And so I just remember sitting there and I was like, what a weird spot for these deer to be. Like, why, like this more seems like more whitetail stuff. B, it doesn't seem like any kind of place any deer would spend any time. You're just over the hill from this county road on public. It doesn't look like there's anything there. You know, it's just kind of like a hillside with some cedars piled up and whatever. And so I just walk through it, and there's like this yellow kind of rabbit brush stuff. And I'm like looking around, I'm like, well, they're nipped off pretty good, like kind of browsed. There's a bunch of deer poop on the ground. And I'm like, you know, like weird. So I went back, got that blind, and I just popped it up and stuck it in the skeletons of these cedars they'd cleared out on this hillside, which at that point I should have started to figure something out, but I didn't till way later. So I go back, I hunt different spots. I, you know, spend a couple days just getting soaked. My buddies and I are all like, it's just nasty, you know, like camping in the pouring rain and sitting in the pouring rain. You're like, you can't dry out.
There's not much worse than tent camping in the rain. That's
dude,
tough.
brutal. And it was gross. So anyway, like the third day of that hunt, I hunted in the morning, and I had a bean field on this walk-in ranch that had a bunch of deer on it, but it was like really hard to hunt with the conditions we had. So I was kind of like, we were kind of like saving that for it to get right, you know? And you're like, I don't know, people might go in, they might not, whatever. So I ended up kind of mostly scouting, hunting a little bit. And then I woke up on the fourth morning, and it was pouring rain again. And I was like, I'm going to go sit that blind. The day before, when I was driving back to camp for lunch, I saw like 150 incher and another buck, like half a mile down the road, on the opposite side of the road. So they weren't on public, but it was like, they could very easily come from the public, but I was like, they're in the proximity. So I'm like, now I've seen 5 bucks sort of in that little spot, you know, not, you know, like not right there, but like kind of in the corridor. So fourth morning I wake up, I'm like, I'm going to go sit that blind, because at least I'll be dry. And I get up, park way down the road, and sneak all the way along there and get in there. And at some point the wind had blown my blind up. So the window was facing straight up to the sky. So my seat was soaked. So I'm like, God, I'm going to be wet. Like I'm going to, whatever. So I get in there, and it, you know, it gets light, and it finally, the rain lets up, and we had like an 8-hour window where it was going to be just a little misty, a little drizzly. And I'm like, maybe they're going to move, you know? And I'm kind of like looking at Onyx. I'm like, I guess I could see why deer would come through here. You know, they can kind of parallel that road, but not be seen. And unless they're in like one part, or they're really close to the road. And then, you know, like you're kind of like talking yourself into like, maybe, right. And I look up, and there's a buck standing there, and he's a little guy. He looks like the dog from The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, when he sticks like the branches on his head. And I'm like, and this is not like me, but I'm like, I want to shoot him so bad, but I'm going to let him go. Like I just wanted to kill him, and I usually would have, but for some reason I was like, I'm going to let him go and see what happens. And I'm telling you, I like made that decision, and behind him, this rack pops up out of the brush, and it's that big buck from the day before.
Oh,
and
really?
I'm like,
the one that you spotted on the other side of the road?
Right. Yeah. So I'm like, I have a 150 class buck walking in, and I range him, 32 yards, 34 yards, something like that from the ground, and draw, shoot, hit the blind with the top of my bow, my limb, just smack. I'm like, oh my God, I just missed him. Like I just went through all of this. I just flamed out on a beautiful, beautiful public land buck. Super nice. So I'm sitting there. I text a few people. I'm like, you're not going to believe this shit. And I'm just like, one of my buddies is like, are you sure you're missed? And I was like, dude, I don't know. My bow smacked the blind. I'm like, I'm guessing I missed. So I walk out there, and there's blood on the ground. And I'm like, oh, now I have a different thing. And I start looking at it. I'm like, okay, this is not great, but there's something to go on. Anyway, we end up giving that deer 6 hours, because I had an 8-hour window. We went out, blood trailed it, jumped him twice. Nightmare scenario. Started raining. We're going along. This deer wouldn't cross the road, and he wouldn't drop down in the valley. So he kept kind of staying, like he kept working with us, and he was sick. We got to a point where my buddy and I kind of lost the trail, and my buddy's really good at blood trailing and spotting deer. and he whistles and he points, and that buck's bedded in a deadfall like 25 yards away. And I'm like, oh my God, like I have my bow with, there's a little window to shoot. And so I dial in, and he's standing next to me. He goes, you're never going to get an arrow through there. And I shoot, and that arrow goes ting, 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 right through the brush into his chest. Just perfect.
Nice.
And he runs up just out of sight, tips over. You know, we go up there, have a big party, like is real stressful, blood trail, the whole thing. But when we got it all taken care of, I went back to look at that, because I was like, why were they here? Like that was just like a happy accident for me to see some deer use this. But in my head, I was like, this is not where you kill 150-inch deer on public land, right? Like there's nothing there. So I go back after we get it all taken care of, because he had killed a deer the day before. So we had lots of butchering to do and like pictures and all that stuff. But we had 2 other buddies hunting, and I love when I kill one on public land. I love when I have an extra day to go back and figure it out. Like why really did it happen? So we go back in there, and we had to pull a blind anyway. And we're looking, and it's like, they came in and they cleared out all those cedars, and there's all this fresh growth underneath, and all those deer were feeding on this hayfield that was, you know, probably a mile away. There's a couple of different fields there, but they're not staying there when it gets light, because that's, you know, like everybody can see them, right? So they come back, and they browse their way back to bed in these bluffs along the Missouri River. And this is one spot out of thousands and thousands of acres where recently they had cleared off maybe 4 acres of cedars on the hillside. So the sun had hit, and they just had fresh growth. And so when we walked it, it was covered in deer sign. And I go, you would never figure that out. Like you would never go into a hunt and be like, that's the kind of pattern I'll be hunting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you would never look for that. There would never be like the targeted, oh, they just cleared a small area, let's go hunt that, right? Like that.
Right. But that deer, and I've had this happen so many times where it's like, where I want them to be is just, it doesn't matter. It's like where they show me they are is what matters. And that situation was so kind of like atypical that I didn't put any part of it really together until after I had killed a deer there, and I could walk in with no pressure to hunt and none of my biases coming in or like my preconceived notions. It was like, it was already over. It was happy time. And then you go in and you look at it and go, this makes so much sense. But until you get to that point, which you mostly won't, right? Like if I didn't kill a deer there, I probably would never have figured that out. And I'll tell you what, when I travel around and I see something like that in a similar environment, you can bet your ass that I'm like looking at it, like maybe, you know, and I might never kill another deer in that kind of pattern again, but it's just such a lesson.
The way, it changed the way you viewed the terrain. I just talked to a gentleman, the last guest that I had on that I recorded with, who was talking about, he's hunting some mountain country in Virginia. And he said there was this little bowl in one of these finger ridges that comes down into the bowl. I don't know why just this one, but he was talking about the gypsy moths, and they had eaten off these leaves real bad up on a bunch of these oaks, and those trees had all basically died off. And he had noticed that when he was scouting, just there was a huge, hole in the canopy. These trees, all the leaves were gone, and he'd come back later that fall, and there was a whole bunch, not like crazy noticeable, but there was a whole bunch of undergrowth around, and ended up shooting a buck on the backside of that ridge. He had jumped it out of there with a doe. The does were all bedding right around that little patch of growth, just because it was something different in a sea of monotonous area. Same kind of idea as what you just mentioned.
Dude, that's so cool to me. Like that, we talk about like soft edges in the woods, especially, like if you're a big woods hunter, like that terrain he's hunting, you have this homogeneous terrain, kind of like on paper. It's like, well, this is the age of the timber and this is what it offers you. And you have one little outlier event like that, and the sunlight hits the forest floor, and now you have a little tiny soft edge, a little bit different cover, and you have a little bit of different food source, and you could not teach that to somebody. Like
that's so hard.
You couldn't read an article about that and be like, that's my new pattern. Like that's how I hunt, like you just couldn't do it. But I mean, what I think about that's so cool. Like that's pure woodsmanship. What he's telling you there, he figured out something that's just like an in the moment thing that the deer know about. Nobody else knows about it. And it probably won't exist next year. Might not be important in 2 weeks, but right now, man.
And it doesn't matter what mapping application you have, what deer
Right.
predicting. I mean, that is what I mean. It is truly down to the intuitive mind of the person that's walking in the woods. And as you mentioned before, that's the kind of stuff that you just have to put through the paces, right? Like everybody knows that, but until you have a moment like that where you're like, holy shit, like that's when you really realize the value, because it's just everybody has a lot of the same tools nowadays, or we know about a lot of the same tools. So those little differences can make such a huge impact on what you do.
Dude, yeah, you can say that again. And I mean, that one of the things there that's sort of a parallel lesson that people they don't care about, they don't want to hear, but I believe it to be like fundamentally true, is you can't replace that in any way, shape, or form with trail cameras. You can only reinforce it. Like you can take something like that and really pin it down with trail cameras, and like you could get a much better look into it that way, but you can't discover that with trail cameras. You know what I mean?
100.
Like it's just a thing that you have to be there, see it, and then if you needed to, you could drop a camera on there. You know, it's kind of like scrape hunting. Like dropping a camera on a scrape is like so valuable. You see the way deer interact with them and when they interact with them and how many use the licking branch versus power up the dirt. Super valuable, but you can't totally learn how and when to hunt scrapes without getting out there and finding the right scrapes and hunting them. You know?
Absolutely. And this is something that I've talked about a lot with some buddies recently. And we put out some silly little videos for the Okayest Hunter YouTube. And one of the videos I was talking about, and I had a buddy say, hey, I was thinking about what you said the other day. And the thing about trail cameras that I really like, and it goes to exactly what you just said, where it's not going to teach you these things, but the more, like I was talking about, buy a bunch of cheap cell cameras, or sorry, not cell cameras, buy a bunch of just cheap SD cameras and go out and make your own predictions. And like, this is how I kind of like, I don't want to say I figured anything out, but it helped me in the big woods of like the National Forest, Northern Wisconsin, is like running a bunch of I keep saying cell cams, running a bunch of cameras when I was younger, because the more times you're making those predictions on little areas and hanging the camera, and even if you don't look at it at all till the winter or the next year, you're getting that feedback of like, was this a spot that mature bucks moved in daylight, or was it not, throughout the season? And the more times you can do that, if you have 10 cheap cameras and you're making 10 times the decisions that you would make normally on a hunting basis, even if you never hunt that spot, mentally it's telling you, oh, big deer do move in spots like this. They do use trails that parallel these soft edges. They do this. And like, I think the more cameras you run, the more times you make those sorts of decisions, obviously that's going to increase your learning exponentially if you're thinking about it in that way. If you're just walking around going, oh, I'm going to throw a camera on every scrape I see and we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's different. But if you go into it with that mindset that you're like literally trying to figure out where these kind of deer move, I think that kind of information, you're not learning it from the cameras, but it's validating those intuitions or those ideas that you already had. And I think that's really powerful for people trying to figure out that next level of like, how do I get after these big deer?
Right. Super valuable. I mean, I've started doing that. I've started using fewer cameras, but the ones I'm using, I'm way more intentional with them. Like to try to learn that stuff you're talking about. Right. And one of the things that I think they do for me now. So I firmly believe patience kills big deer. Like I think patience kills everything, honestly. Like, I mean, we did an all day sit for that bear last Saturday for a reason. Like, I'm like, that bear's coming in randomly throughout the day. Sometimes it's 7:30 in the morning, noon. A lot of times it's in the evening, like you'd expect. But it's like, if you can sit all day for that bear, like you might get him. And I think when you run cameras, like I've the last couple of years, I've run a camera on a specific trail in northern Wisconsin that I'm just super curious about. And what it has shown me is that it's, you know, it's a soft edge along a swamp. Like they have a lot of high woods to the south of them when they travel this, but that's where everybody hunts. And then they have this gnarly big swamp to the north for a long ways that I just assume has way fewer people in it, because I know that it does, because it's just intuitively makes sense, right? So they kind of like, they hug that little tiny elevation line and they hug that soft edge. And for a couple of years, I've left a camera up there and just, I want to see who makes it through the gun season. I want to see who's using it during the rut. But I had never just put one up in the summer to leave all year. And I did that this year because I'm like, I know that they're using this during the rut somewhat. I just want to see. And what it's done for me is that specific spot. And like you were talking about, like putting a camera on a scrape or whatever, it helps me be way more patient. So I know a lot of people will go, like, I can't do an all day sit. Like a lot of people can't do it. Like I really think that all day sits are pretty rare out there from the people I talk to. But you know, if you have like 6 days during the rut, right? You have your rutcation. If you have 3 years of data from one trail, and you know, once every 2 or 3 days, a hammer just comes down that trail at some point, you're like, I have 6 days. He's coming through. Or somebody is, you know? So it's like, it's still a real test. Like it's still a grind. But when you know that, or I look at that, even like turkey hunting, bow hunting turkeys, you know, I hunt a lot of small properties where I can't just go run and gun. Like I can't, like, I'm like, I have to trust the scouting in the spot. And, you know, people think I'm nuts for this, but I go in and I sit all day for turkeys, because if you scout out a spot the right way and you've run some cameras on there, and you know the gobblers come through there sometimes at 10, sometimes it's 3 in the afternoon, but they do come through there. You just go kill them if you can ride it out. Whitetails are the same way. I mean, like, we're looking for all of these new tactics and like the new calls to buy and whatever else, when in reality, like rut hunting, the reason that rut hunting is easy compared to a lot of other hunting is if you have the right terrain trap or pinch point, whatever, if you're patient enough to ride that out in the right wind, it will feed a deer to you eventually. But we defeat ourselves, right? Like we defeat ourselves by like second guessing it after 4 hours the first morning. We haven't seen a deer yet. Like, oh, I got to move. Yeah. And it's like, no, man, if you have run a camera on that trail all November long for 3 Novembers, and it has shown you that every year, you know, like the caliber of buck you'd be really happy with comes through there once every 3 days, that's a total gift. Like that is, you don't have that any part of the season probably where you have as high of odds and as good of intel to ride out that program and make it happen. But we have a hard time with that. Like we have a hard time just implementing that, even though a trail camera and could show you that that's exactly the move you should make.
That's 100% spot on. And I'm guilty of wanting to move and be in the best spot probably more than anybody else. Like I really like to be mobile and move and stuff. And a lot of times that's like when I'm doing out of state stuff, right? So like if something's not working out, I'm just going to, you know, still hunt my way up and make a move. But that trail cam data and that ability to put in time, I think that is something, especially during rut, I've just been lucky earlier in my career of like my dad saying, you know, from when I was 12 years old on, we hunt all day during guns. Like you just always do that. Like that's what we did. And early on, I killed some really good bucks between 10 and 2, which was like the numbers that everyone said, but literally between 1050 and 150 is where I've shot all my mature deer in Wisconsin during gun season. I've never shot one outside of that window. So like early on, it just solidified. Well, yes, that is when you kill big deer. So like, it's been easier for me to sit than most people because that's right. What I've seen. That's what's happened.
But that lesson there is huge because you had it reinforced with positive success. Right.
Yeah.
And if you've never tried that and you can't get away with one, can't be one sit, you know what I mean? Like you got to give it a fair amount of effort to see if it works for you or not. And that lesson that you learned, that's like that puts you so far ahead of almost everyone. Just the ability to do that. And you think, like, you talk about gun season and like breaking the mold. Nobody does that. Like, I don't know what percentage of gun hunters go out and sit all day. It is very few. Like, I mean, it is a very small amount, right?
Yeah.
So then you have the aspect of, well, every freaking big buck out there knows that because he's witnessed that every gun season his entire life. And so if he wants to switch beds or do something, he's not going to do it when he would outside the gun season, probably, right? Too dangerous. Like,
Yeah.
So he's going to go when he's like, I heard all the four-wheelers drive out. Like, I know, like I
smelled the salami sandwiches. They're all on the tailgate
right.
eating lunch.
I can hear them snoring in their naps, sleeping one off in the cabin in the bunks. And he's like, I'm going to go get a drink, or I'm going to go try to find a doe quick, or I'm going to go switch beds because the thermals or the heat or whatever. And it's like, it's a lot of this stuff is not as hard, like, as we make it seem. Like, we give them a lot of credit, and, pressured bucks are tough to kill, right? But at the same time, patience is like, oh, it is such an asset.
Yeah, and what you just mentioned is, I mean, that could absolutely be it. The natural travel where the bucks just feel the most. But like a lot of it is when people are getting up and moving at 10 o'clock or at coming back at 1 o'clock, like they're gonna bump deer, and like that I think was a huge part of why we saw success in that time frame. And then I just wanted to give a time reference to anyone listening. Like, I didn't do that. Like, I didn't shoot a good one. It was 8 years. I started when I was 12. I shot the first big one when I was 20. So like, it was a pretty good span of hunting all day. It didn't just happen. Tony was like, yeah, don't just do it one sit. I did it for 8 years before I shot a big one doing that. So, but patience and time.
Right. And it's not, it is like literally that simple. And again, like, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not, like, this is not the answer to every problem people have out there, right? It's just one very like nice tool to have in the kit. Like, if you're the kind of person who can do that and go sit all day, you have something that most of your competition already doesn't. It might not pay off for you this season. It might not pay off for 3 seasons, but it will pay off. And it's not just whitetails. Like, if you ever go hunt elk or spot and stock mule deer, head somewhere out of state for turkeys or whatever, using your time that way is better than not. It just is.
Like that. That's, I mean, and that applies to everything, but that's like that little 1% rule, right? Where like, you don't need to like get better overnight. You just need to make like one little change. If you can like think of how much time people put into thinking and doing and trail camming, and if you can just spend the middle of your day, like if you can make that little change and up your odds, those are the kind of things you have to do. Those are what successful people who do it every year, that's what they're doing. Is like, there is no better big buck killer than time. And like, some people have more of it to spend in the fall, some people have less, but you better use your time wisely, because that's your number one asset.
Well, and you're right. I mean, having 2 weeks during the rut would be great, but most people don't. But if you have a day to hunt, you have a whole day to hunt. If you go on an out-of-state trip for a long weekend with your buddies, you have 4 days, 5 days, whatever. If you don't use that time efficiently, and I'm not saying that you necessarily have to do all day sits, like a lot of the trips we take for public land whitetails somewhere, it's early season. So it's a morning sit and an evening sit, but you have that middle part of the day that's always devoted to scouting, like where didn't you get to look at yet? And it's hard, it's easier to go back at camp and eat some candy bars and chill out, whatever. But really, when you think about like setting yourself up for options, because the wind's going to change and the weather's going to change and people are going to come in, and the more like backups you have, the better. So you go in, you do your morning sit, pull your set, whatever, and go like, well, I found this spot. I want to go look at this, track check this pond or whatever. I'm like, I go in, I try to force myself to do that every time I go, because if I sneak into some of those places, like eventually it's like the all day sits, like the first one might not work, but if you don't walk in, like you see this a lot. I see this out west a lot. Maybe it's because you see people more. but they'll walk in talking, it's like they don't plan to hunt it for several days, even though I'm like, you must be out here on the same program I am. Like you don't seem like you're local. And just you're already like kind of burning a potential spot for no other reason than just like not paying attention a little better. And I'm like, man, wherever you are, if you have a chance to go just like poke in and look at an area or something you're curious about, or check a fence crossing or something, go in like you're gonna hunt it. Like go in with intention and be like, and most of the time when you do that stuff, you don't find what you're looking for. But when you do, you don't want to like face the reality that you already screwed it up.
You don't want to be like, oh, this is that thing Tony was talking about. Shit,
Dude,
I
it's
should
so
have my
easy.
bow.
It's so easy to do, but it's just, I don't know. It's just a matter of like, just kind of like, okay, what can go wrong and how do I avoid as much of that as possible? Like, how do I can't
That's a good
control,
outlook.
like you can't control other people coming in or whatever. Like you can't control if a cold front or a warm front blows in, or the wind's always out of the east when you needed it out of the west or whatever. But you can control, like if you're willing to go scout at noon and check a few spots, and how you do that, like how you conduct yourself there to not hurt your chances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Tony, we're coming up to an hour and 20 minutes here. It's 10 o'clock. I probably got to get to bed soon. So I think, as much as I don't want to wrap it up, I think we're probably going to wrap it up. Um, any parting notes or anything on your agenda that you're looking forward to, or just any last thoughts that you have or you want to share you think could help somebody? Or
Um, you know, yeah, I'll say this. I've been writing about this and talking about this a lot on the podcast. I I just want everybody who's out there listening to this, like as you go through this season, think about the times that you're like trying to talk yourself into not hunting. Like think about when you're like, well, the conditions are this way, so I'm not going to go, or I don't feel up to it for whatever. Like I don't want to get up tomorrow. Go. Figure out a way to get yourself to go. Like don't give yourself a bunch of excuses to not go, because as hunters, like we do that all the time, and it's generally not the best path to getting better, even though we think, like we talk ourselves into it and I say, well, I'm making the responsible decision because it's going to be too hot, there won't be deer moving. Like they're going to be moving somewhere and they're going to be thirsty. Like figure that out. Like, oh, it's going to be too windy. Okay, well, that wind's knocking down a bunch of acorns. Like what does that mean for your hunts? Figure, like, instead of finding reasons to not go, find reasons to go, because you won't regret it.
absolutely. And I mean, even if you don't have a plan, you haven't implemented any of the wonderful tactics you've been reading about, being in the woods is your best ally, right? Use your time. So thank you, Tony. That was a great parting word there. I appreciate you coming on tonight and talking with me. It was really enjoyable learning from you, hearing from you. I hope you have a great season. I hope the girls do some good things this season. You have some good time with them. That's another thing I've been thinking a lot about, is balancing my passion of hunting with my family. And don't forget to spend some time with your family, folks out there, that you only get so much of that too. So make sure you enjoy and make the most of that, and take a kid hunting if you can. So thanks a lot, Tony. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
All right. Good luck this season.
They knew that this wasn't going to probably happen, and I started to lose my confidence, and I'm sitting there and I can't see anything because it's September 1, lots of stuff growing up, and I'm just tucked there. Like I can see behind me to the riverbank, and I can see the trail that they crossed to jump over this fence in a low spot. And I look back and I see this white patch, and I'm like, God, what is that? And it was a throat patch from the smaller buck. He was nibbling on this sweet clover along the river. And I thought, holy cow, like there's his buddy right there. And I look, and here comes the big 8-pointer walking down.
How far was he when you saw the throat patch? Was he fairly close?
Maybe 80, 90 yards. They were across the river. They had to come get to me yet.
Okay.
So I'm like, this might work, right? Like this might work. And they kind of mess around over there, and the 8-pointer crosses, and he got to 20 yards, no clue I was there. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, this is a really nice deer. Like, I think I underjudged him a little bit. I shoot him square in the guts. Total buck fever, terrible shot, no excuse, just shanked it. And he ran off and got into the river. And so I ended up, I had enough daylight left where I'm like, I haven't seen him come up the other side. And so I'm like, maybe I can crawl up there and get another one in him. And I'm like, you know, because I'm like, I killed this deer, but he's not dead for a while kind of deal, right? Like, I just knew it. I just totally screwed it up. And so I crawl up there and I look, and he's bedded on the far side of the river in the water. And I range him, and he's 66 yards or 65 yards. I don't remember, mid 60s far. And he's facing away from me. And, you know, like when they're, you know, this is not an angle you should take, right? Like this is you got to get another one in him kind of deal. And there's like a little pocket.
You just do whatever you can to put another one in them, right? Like,
right. Absolutely. And so there's that little pocket behind the ribs. And I'm like, the way he's angled, I'm like, if I can slip it in there, it'll run right up his chest and he'll be in real trouble. But it's like shooting at a baseball from, you know, mid 60s, right? And so I dial in because I use a single pin mover, and I shoot, and that arrow goes whoop, right into that pocket. And he stands up and takes about 3 steps and tips over in the river. And I walk up to him, and he's like so much bigger than I thought. He's a 140-inch 8-pointer, tons of mass, but mass all over. So I just kind of underjudged him. But I remember thinking that was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? Like I had, you know, like I had been told it's impossible, right? In my head, I had thought this, you know, a million times I had that self-doubt of being like, this is not going to happen. This is a bad idea. Like, you got to make a different move. Like, you got to figure something else out. And when that happened, and I've had a bunch of things like that happen since, and even before that, where I realized that it's just my mentality holding me back. Like, it's what I believe, like what I've filled in the blanks, you know, from other people, like vicariously through other people. I've applied that to so much of my hunting, and it has only held me back. You know, like
it's like that picture you paint in your head of what you think it's going to be like. Like, I still do that, like with out of state hunts. Like, you're going somewhere, and like in your head, you just have this little bias or this little picture that's already been preconceived. And when you get there, you know what you should do, but part of you is like, well, maybe because I'm in this other spot, I have to do it this other way. And then you end up just kicking yourself in the butt, because if you would have just listened to your intuition from day one, you would have been probably in a better spot.
Dude, totally. Yeah. I mean, but that's, I think what I would say, like, I take away from that the most, like what you're talking about, is it is just hard for most people to rack up a lot of experience. So we try to bring in from other sources, right? But there's no supplement for it. You know, like there's no supplement for getting out there and trying new stuff and hunting new terrain, and just like sort of just challenging yourself to be different from yourself. Not, you know, and if you need inspiration from somebody, and, you know, you want to look to Andy May or Daniel Falter, whoever, and be like, I kind of want to hunt like those guys. Great. Like, if that's the motivation, you need to try it. But really, you just got to sit there and go, what do I usually do that doesn't work? And how can I just do something different? And so much of it, like, it's not as hard as we think. It's just, you got to go through some failure stuff to see that there's like a potential for it to work. And we just 100%. Hold our, you know, I mean, I look at it like when I quit drinking, I started working out because I needed something to do. Like, I was like, I gotta have an outlet, because I will go back, because I'm a addict at heart. I'm an idiot. I will screw this up 100%. And, you know, like when I started running, I was like, I hate every second of this. And I still run like crazy. I still hate lacing up my running shoes and like the build up to it. And I never regret it. And it's never as bad when I go. But in my head, even though I should know, because I'm several thousand miles deep in this journey, it's still my brain is like, don't do it. Like, don't do it. And I think with hunting, we don't spend that much time hunting. Like, you know, we think about it a lot, We think about
That's
scouting
true.
a lot, but the actual going into the woods and, saddling up or however you hunt, we don't do it that much. And so it's like, you don't really want to take that one night or 2 nights a week that you have to hunt in the 6-7 weeks before before gun season opens up or whatever. You're like, I don't want to risk something with my limited amount of precious time, but it's just like, that's how you level up.
100%. And Tony, I feel bad because I clicked the record button. I think you saw it count down. I thought we were just chit chatting, but you just started telling some really good stuff. So I just started recording. So I never even gave you.
Do you want to start over? We can, because my computer, that camera is like super slow, and I don't know why. Does it look okay on your end?
I literally have no lag. It looks normal on my end. It did cut out like 2 or 3 times just for like a second, but there's no lag. You're showing up completely fine on my end.
Okay, that's all I need. On my end, it's lagging behind. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't. Do you want to start over?
I don't need to start over. I can make Eric chop it up. I just wanted to like give you a proper introduction because you're the, one of the bigger name guests that I've talked to on here. So I would love to properly introduce you and then continue our conversation. I didn't want to like throw a hook to it, but this is not my forte either.
I'll tell you what, why don't you properly introduce me and then I'll just do another story and I'll keep it a little shorter. And then that way, if you need it just that way, that's fine too.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I don't care. I've done a lot of podcasts. Trust me.
Yeah, I know that, and you pen thousands of articles. So,
right.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I just want to like almost kick it off. I don't even want to make it like super formal now. I just want to talk a little bit about you and thank you for coming on, and then we can just jump right back into whatever. You don't even have to retell the same one if you don't want to, or whatever.
I'll do a different story.
Whatever you think, man. You got stories on stories on stories. I did just want to, when you mentioned the cottonwood tree, man, I had that same thing happen to me this past year. I had a spot on a map that I've been looking at, real lowland, swampy shit. And there was like 2 trees that cast a shadow on the mapping. And I was like, those might be big enough to get a stand in. So I went back in there, like our second weekend of gun season, hiked in, pretty far walk, and got to that tree. Well, it cast a shadow because it was freaking bigger than my car, a giant cottonwood. But I was too stubborn to sit on the ground. I climbed up that son of a bitch and got my first stick up about 14 feet in the air. It split into 3, and I finally got up there. But man, that made me laugh when you said that. So,
nice.
All right, Tony, what I'll do here is I do just want to introduce you. So I'll just kick you. I'm going to put you backstage so you'll be able to see me and hear me. I'll just say who we have on tonight. I'll give you a quick little intro. You have too many accolades to mention everything. I'm just going to fanboy a little bit, and then I'll bring you on and we'll pretend like we started there. Is that okay?
Perfect.
All right, cool. Thank you.